Look at yourself without filters. In the previous episode, you did something that very few people manage to do in their entire lives. You opened your hands. You let go. You looked at everything you'd been carrying, that resentment, those dead relationships, those versions of yourself that no longer existed, those imaginary conversations you replayed every night like a broken record, those apologies that were never coming, those futures that only lived inside your head, and you started to let go. Not all at once. Nobody lets go of everything all at once, but you started, and starting is already more than most people ever do. You learned from Epictetus that we only suffer from what we cling to as if it were ours. You learned from Marcus Aurelius that holding on to pain honors no one. It only destroys the one who holds on. You learned from Seneca that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And with those truths in hand, you began the process of emptying the backpack you'd been dragging around for years. Your hands are freer now. Your back is a little straighter. Your chest breathes a little deeper. The weight hasn't completely disappeared, because letting go is an ongoing process, but something lightened, something shifted. And that space that opened up, that space that used to be occupied by everything you were carrying, is now empty, available, waiting. But there's a problem. A problem you weren't expecting. A problem nobody warned you about. A problem that is possibly more uncomfortable than everything we've worked on until now. When you carry that much weight for that many years, that weight becomes a distraction, a massive, constant, all-consuming distraction that takes up your entire field of vision. When you're so busy carrying resentments and dead relationships and old versions of yourself, you don't have the time or energy or mental space to do something that is absolutely fundamental. Look at yourself. The weight keeps you so busy surviving that you never stop to observe who the person doing the surviving actually is. You're so focused on what you're carrying that you never look at the one who's carrying it. It's like someone who spends their entire life complaining about their luggage without ever stopping to ask why they packed so many unnecessary things in the first place. The question is never about the suitcases. The question is always about the one who fills them. And now that you've let go, now that the weight has lessened, now that there's space and silence where before there was only noise and burden, something becomes exposed that was previously hidden by all that emotional baggage, something the weight was concealing, something that, maybe without you realizing it, the weight was designed to hide. You without the costume of suffering, you without the constant distraction of resentment, you without the convenient excuse of pain, you without the victim story that allowed you not to take responsibility, you naked in front of yourself, with nothing left to hide behind, no one left to blame, no external weight to justify why you are where you are. And that's terrifying, because when you can finally look at yourself without all those layers on top, what you see isn't always what you expected. Sometimes what you see is worse than what you imagined. Sometimes what you see confronts you with truths you'd rather not know. Sometimes what you see is a pattern repeated so many times you can no longer keep calling it coincidence. Sometimes what you see is the reason your life is where it is, and that reason isn't bad luck, or fate, or circumstances, or the people who failed you. That reason is you. Welcome to episode 4 of From Lost to Unstoppable. This is Stoicism for Winners, and today we're going to stand you in front of the most honest mirror that exists. Not the bathroom mirror that shows you the surface. Not the social media mirror where you choose which angle to show. Not the mirror of people who tell you what you want to hear. The mirror that shows you who you really are, without filters, without editing, without the approved version you invented, so you could live with yourself. Today we're going to talk about self-knowledge. but not the superficial self-knowledge of personality tests and self-help books that tell you you're introverted with analytical tendencies and make you feel like you already know yourself. No. We're going to talk about the self-knowledge that hurts, the kind that confronts, the kind that shows you the patterns you repeat without realizing it, the kind that reveals why you always end up in the same place no matter how many times you change cities, jobs, partners, or plans. The self-knowledge that the Stoics considered not an intellectual luxury, but the absolute foundation of any life worth living. Because there's a truth you need to hear today, and it's this: you cannot change what you don't know. You cannot fix what you don't see. You cannot stop repeating a mistake if you don't even know you're making it. And you've spent years, maybe decades, repeating the same mistakes over and over again, convinced that the problem is external, that the problem is bad luck, that the problem is, I always end up with the same kind of people, or the same thing always happens to me, without stopping for a single second to consider the possibility that the constant in all those failures, in all those broken relationships, in all those projects that collapsed, is you. I'm not saying this to crush you. I'm saying it to free you, because if the problem were bad luck, there would be nothing you could do. You can't control bad luck. But if the problem is you, then there's everything you can do. Because you can get to know yourself, you can change yourself, you can transform yourself, but only if you look first. Only if you have the courage to stand in front of the mirror and not look away when what you see makes you uncomfortable. Today, you're going to need that courage, more than in any previous episode. If this episode confronts you, if something you hear today makes you feel exposed, seen, caught in a pattern you've spent years refusing to admit, leave it in the comments with this phrase: today I look at myself without filters to stop repeating what destroys me. That phrase is a commitment to radical honesty with yourself, not the comfortable honesty of admitting flaws you already know, and that cost you nothing. The uncomfortable honesty of seeing the patterns you've been avoiding, the truths you've been dodging, the flaws you've been justifying with stories so elaborate you've actually started believing them. Today the mirror stands before you, and it's not going to move until what you see is the truth. There's a story told about mirrors in ancient times. Before glass mirrors existed, mirrors were polished metal surfaces, bronze, copper, silver, and the image they returned wasn't perfect. It was an approximate version, blurry, distorted. You saw something that looked like you, but not exactly you. The details got lost. The imperfections were softened. It was a kind reflection. A reflection that allowed you to see yourself without fully seeing yourself. That's how you've been looking at yourself your whole life, with a bronze mirror, with a distorted reflection that shows you an approximate, softened, edited version of who you really are. A reflection that omits the details that hurt. A reflection that blurs the sharp edges of your flaws. A reflection that allows you to live with yourself without having to face the parts you don't like, the parts that shame you, the parts you've hidden so well that even you no longer remember where you put them. A reflection that tells you you're not that bad, when the truth is there are patterns destroying you in silence that you can't even see because the mirror doesn't have the resolution to show them to you. Today we're trading the bronze mirror for one made of glass, high definition, one that doesn't soften anything, one that shows every line, every crack, every shadow, every pattern, every scar you gave yourself with your own repeated decisions. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be confronting. You're going to want to look away more than once. But don't look away, because what you're going to see in that mirror is not your sentence. It's your map. The map that shows you exactly where you are, exactly what brought you here, and exactly what you need to change so you don't end up in the same place again. Without that map, you're walking blind. With that map, every step has direction. The Stoics weren't afraid of the mirror. They sought it out. They needed it. They understood that self-knowledge is not an act of vanity or torture. It's an act of power. The greatest power there is, knowing who you are so you can decide who you want to be. Without that information, any attempt at change is an illusion. A castle built on sand, a new facade over a rotting structure. First, Stoic. Lesson. You think you know yourself, but you only know the edited version you invented so you could live with yourself. If I asked you right now, who are you? What would you answer? You'd probably start with your name, then your profession, your family role. I'm a father. I'm an engineer. I'm an entrepreneur. Maybe you'd add some personality traits you like about yourself. I'm loyal. I'm hardworking. I'm honest. Maybe you'd mention something from your past that you consider formative. I'm someone who built themselves up from nothing. I'm someone who learned the hard way. And you'd be convinced that description is real, that that's who you are, that you know yourself. But you don't know yourself. You know a version. A carefully edited, carefully selected, carefully constructed version built over years to serve a very specific function, allowing you to live with yourself without too much discomfort. That version isn't you. It's a character you created unconsciously, that you polished over time, that you rehearsed in front of the bronze mirror we talked about in the introduction, and that you now play so naturally you forgot it's a performance. It's like an actor who's been playing the same role for so many years. They can no longer tell where the character ends and the person begins. You are that actor. And the role you're playing is the acceptable version of yourself. Want to know how this works? I'm going to explain it with a precision that will probably make you uncomfortable. Your mind has an internal editor, an editor that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without rest, without vacation, without pause. And that editor's function is singular, to filter the information you have about yourself so the resulting story is bearable. That editor takes your memories and modifies them, takes your flaws and minimizes them, takes your mistakes and justifies them, takes your virtues and amplifies them, takes your real motivations, which are sometimes selfish, sometimes cowardly, sometimes petty, and replaces them with acceptable motivations that let you keep believing you're a good person. And it does this so well, you don't even know it's happening. When you lost that job, the editor turned the story from, "I got fired because my performance dropped for months, and I never did anything to fix it," into, "They let me go because the company didn't value my talent." When that relationship ended, the editor turned, "I actively contributed to destroying something that could have worked if I'd put in the same effort I demanded," into, "They just weren't the right person for me." When that business failed, the editor turned, "I made impulsive decisions based on my ego and refused to listen to the warning signs," into, "The market wasn't ready," or "I had bad luck with the wrong partner." See the pattern? In every edited story, you come out clean. You're the misunderstood hero. You're the victim of circumstances. You're the unrecognized talent. You're the one who did everything right but got taken down by external forces you couldn't control. It's a comfortable narrative, reassuring, protective, and completely false. I'm not saying everything bad that's happened to you is your fault. I'm not saying there weren't external circumstances, people who acted badly, unfair situations. Of course there were. But the internal editor doesn't make subtle adjustments. The editor erases your participation entirely, takes you out of the equation, turns you into a passive spectator of your own life. And when you become a passive spectator, you lose something crucial: the ability to learn from your mistakes. Because if you never made a mistake, if it was always someone else's fault, if it was always the circumstances, then there's nothing to learn, nothing to correct, nothing to change. And if there's nothing to change, why would next time be any different? Exactly. It won't be different. That's why you keep repeating. But the editor doesn't just work with the past. It also works with the present. It works in real time, editing your perception of yourself at every moment of the day. When you behave selfishly, the editor rewrites it as, "I'm taking care of my own interests," which is healthy. When you avoid a difficult conversation you know you need to have, the editor rewrites it as, "It's not the right time. I'm being strategic." When you blow up at someone who didn't deserve it, the editor rewrites it as, "I was under a lot of pressure." Anyone would have reacted that way. When you freeze up with fear and don't take the step you know you need to take, the editor rewrites it as, "I'm being cautious, analyzing things carefully before I act." Every act of cowardice becomes caution. Every act of selfishness becomes self-care. Every act of laziness becomes, "I needed to rest." Every act of avoidance becomes strategy. The editor is a narrative genius, a first-rate novelist who turns every chapter of your life into a story where you're always the admirable protagonist who made the best possible decision given the circumstances. And you believe it. Of course you believe it, because the alternative would be unbearable. The alternative would be looking at yourself and saying, "I acted out of cowardice. I acted out of selfishness. I acted out of laziness. I avoided what was hard because I was scared. I hurt someone because I was only thinking of myself. I stopped trying because it was more comfortable than risking failure." The alternative would be recognizing that you're not always the person you think you are, and that hurts too much. So the editor keeps working, editing, softening, beautifying, and you keep living inside a version of yourself that isn't real. But there's a price for living inside that fiction, and the price is steep, much steeper than you imagine. The price is that you never really change. Because to really change, to change at the deep level, the structural level, the level that actually matters, you first need to clearly see what needs to change, and the editor makes sure you never see it. It keeps you blind to your own patterns, keeps you deaf to the signals life sends you again and again, each time louder, each time more obvious, each time more impossible to ignore. And yet you ignore them because the editor reinterprets them as something that has nothing to do with you. It keeps you numb to the consequences of your own decisions, convincing you those consequences are the product of something external, never something internal. And so the years pass, 5, 10, 20, and one day you wake up and realize you're in exactly the same place, making the same mistakes, with different people, in different scenarios, in a different city, with a different job, with a different partner, but with the same devastatingly familiar result. And you don't understand why. Because no one can understand a pattern they can't see. And the reason is simple. You never saw yourself. You never really knew yourself. You only knew the character the editor created for you. And that character can't change because it doesn't know it needs to change. It lives in a fictional world where everything it does is justified, where all its failures are someone else's fault, where every mistake has an explanation that completely exonerates it. The Stoics called this a form of madness. Not clinical madness, the madness of living disconnected from the reality about oneself. Epictetus said, "It's impossible to learn what you think you already know." And that's the perfect trap of self-deception. You believe you know yourself, so you never undertake the real task of knowing yourself. You're so satisfied with the edited version that you never feel the need to look for the real one. Your task for this lesson is uncomfortable, and I need you to do it with the most brutal honesty you have available. Think of 3 situations from your recent past, the last year or 2, where things didn't go as you expected. A relationship that failed, a project that didn't work out, a conflict that got out of control. Whatever it was, 3 situations. Now, write 2 versions of each one. The first version is the story you've been telling yourself, the edited version, the version where you come out clean and the circumstances or other people were to blame. Write it exactly as you've been repeating it. The second version is the honest version, the version where you include your real participation, where you admit what you did or didn't do that contributed to the outcome, where you acknowledge the signals you ignored, the decisions you avoided, the conversations you didn't have, the moments where you chose comfort over what was right. Compare the 2 versions. The distance between them is the distance between who you think you are and who you really are. And that distance is exactly the ground you need to cover to start truly knowing yourself. Second Stoic lesson. You repeat the same mistakes with different people, in different jobs, in different cities, because the problem always travels with you. There's a phrase you've probably said more times than you'd like to admit. Maybe not in these exact words, but with this essence. The same thing always happens to me. I always end up with the same abusive bosses. I always end up with people who don't appreciate me. I always partner with the wrong people. My projects always start well and end badly. I always give more than I receive. I always get betrayed. I always get left. I always get let down. Always, always, always. Have you ever stopped to think about what that word really implies? Always means without exception. It means a pattern repeats consistently over time. It means that no matter how many times the variables change, the result stays the same. The people change, but the result is the same. The places change, but the result is the same. The circumstances change, but the result is the same. The years change, the decades, the contexts, the opportunities, and the result is still the same. And you know what happens when everything changes except the result? It means the cause isn't in what changes, the cause is in what remains. And the only thing that remains in all those situations, in all those jobs, in all those relationships, in all those cities, in all those failed attempts, is you. You are the constant. That's one of the hardest truths to accept that exists. Harder than accepting you're lost, which is what we did in episode 1. Harder than confronting the lies you tell yourself, which is what we did in episode 2. Harder than letting go of what you carry, which is what we did in episode 3. Because this truth doesn't point to something external. This truth points at you, directly, without intermediaries, without excuses, without mitigating factors. The problem travels with you. You changed jobs 3 times looking for an environment that would value you, and in all 3 places you ended up feeling the same way. Is it possible all 3 jobs were toxic? Yes, it's possible. Is it probable? No. What's probable is that there's something in the way you relate to authority, in the way you handle frustration, in the way you communicate your needs, in the way you react under pressure, that creates the same conflict in whatever environment you're in. The scenery changes. The lead actor doesn't. You ended 4 relationships in 10 years. In all of them you felt unappreciated. In all of them you felt you gave more than you received. In all of them you ended up frustrated, exhausted, with the feeling that you'd chosen wrong again. Is it possible all 4 people were incapable of appreciating you? Maybe. But what are the odds that 4 completely different people at different moments in your life would fail you in exactly the same way? The odds are low. What's much more probable is that there's a pattern in how you choose partners, or a pattern in how you behave within a relationship, or a pattern in what you attract, what you tolerate, what you communicate without realizing it, what you expect without saying it, what you demand without deserving it, or what you offer believing it's enough when it isn't. You started 3 businesses. All 3 launched with explosive energy. All 3 grew fast at first, and all 3 collapsed at the same point. When the excitement phase ended and the discipline phase began the routine, the consistent work without immediate results. Was it bad luck? Was it the market? Was it your partners? Maybe partly, but the pattern reveals something the internal editor doesn't want you to see, that your relationship with sustained discipline has a problem, that you're brilliant in the adrenaline phase and disappear in the consistency phase, that your initial drive is powerful but your long-term endurance has cracks. And until you see that pattern, you're going to keep starting things you never finish, and wondering why everything starts so well and ends so badly. There's a late Stoic philosopher named Musonius Rufus, Epictetus's teacher, who said something profoundly relevant here. He said that exile, the change of location, doesn't cure the defects of the soul, that you carry your character with you wherever you go, that changing cities without changing yourself is simply redecorating a prison. The walls are different, the furniture is new, but the cell is the same, and the prisoner is the same. That's exactly what you do every time you believe the solution is out there. If I change jobs, things will be different. If I move to another city, I'll start fresh. If I find the right person, everything will work out. If I start another business, this time it'll succeed. And every time you make the change, there's a brief period, a period of illusion, where it seems to have worked. Everything is new, everything is fresh, everything is different. And for a few weeks, maybe a few months, you feel renewed. You feel like this time it really is different, that this time you found what you were looking for. And then, slowly, like a tide rising without making a sound, the same patterns start to appear, the same frustration, the same arguments, the same conflicts, the same feelings. And one day, you wake up in your new job, in your new city, with your new partner, and you realize you feel exactly the same as before, because the landscape changed, but the observer didn't. And the observer is the one who determines what they see. This isn't a punishment. This isn't a curse. This is an invitation to stop looking for the problem outside and start looking for it inside. Because inside is the only place where you can actually do something about it. Think about a doctor who has a patient with chronic pain. The patient goes to one hospital and gets a diagnosis they don't like. So they go to another hospital, and another, and another, looking for someone who'll give them a different diagnosis, looking for someone who'll tell them it's not that serious, looking for someone who'll tell them what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. And meanwhile, the disease advances. Because it doesn't matter how many hospitals they visit, the disease travels with them. It's not in the hospital, it's in their body. Your patterns are the disease, and your life is the body. It doesn't matter how many scenarios you change, how many new people enter your life, how many new cities you explore. The patterns travel with you because they're yours. They're written into the way you perceive the world, react to it, relate to people, make decisions, handle conflict, face uncertainty. They're part of your programming. And the only way to change a program is to first see it, understand how it works, and consciously intervene to rewrite it. But none of that can happen as long as you keep believing the problem is outside. As long as the internal editor keeps convincing you it was the boss, it was the partner, it was the business associate, it was the economy, it was bad luck, nothing is going to change. Because you'll be trying to fix something that isn't broken in the wrong place, while what's actually broken remains intact, inside you, producing the same results over and over and over again. Your task for this lesson requires a level of honesty that's going to be difficult, but absolutely necessary. I want you to identify your repeating pattern, yours, the specific one, the one that has manifested in multiple areas of your life, with different people and under different circumstances, but with the same result. To find it, do the following. Write down the last 3 situations in your life that ended badly. Relationships, jobs, projects, friendships, whatever. 3 situations. And for each one, answer 3 questions with the rawest honesty you can muster. First, what did I feel when things started going wrong? Not what happened. What did you feel? Frustration, anger, helplessness, rejection, abandonment. Second, how did I react when I felt that? Did I shut down? Did I attack? Did I run? Did I freeze? Did I play the victim? Did I blame the other person? Third, have I felt this before in other situations? Have I reacted this same way before? If the answer to the third question is yes, and it's going to be yes, then you've just seen your pattern. Not life's pattern, not bad luck's pattern, your pattern. The one that travels with you everywhere. The one that doesn't go away when you change jobs, cities, or relationships. The one that only goes away when you see it, understand it, and consciously decide to do something different. That's the first real step toward self-knowledge. Not knowing what personality type you are according to some internet test, knowing what pattern you repeat, and that's destroying you without you realizing it. That's knowing yourself, and that's what changes everything. Third Stoic lesson. The oracle at Delphi had a single instruction carved in stone. Know thyself, and 2,000 years later, you're still ignoring it. In ancient Greece, on a slope of Mount Parnassus, there was a place considered the center of the world. Not the geographic center, the spiritual center, the point where the human touched the divine. It was called the Oracle at Delphi, and for centuries it was the most sacred site in all of Greek civilization. Kings, generals, philosophers, and ordinary citizens traveled from every corner of the known world to get there. They made journeys of weeks, sometimes months, on foot, by ship, crossing mountains and seas, risking their lives, spending fortunes just to reach that temple and ask a question. One single question about their future, about a decision they needed to make, about the fate of their kingdoms or their families. And when they finally arrived, when they climbed the temple steps after weeks of exhausting travel, the first thing they saw wasn't the oracle. The first thing they saw was an inscription carved in stone above the temple entrance. 2 words in ancient Greek that changed the history of human thought forever. Gnoti se auton. Know thyself. Think about what that means. These people traveled from the other side of the known world to ask a divine oracle what they should do with their lives. They came seeking answers about the future, about war, about love, about wealth, about destiny. And the first thing the temple told them before they could ask a single question was, before you seek answers outside, seek them within. Before you ask what you should do, ask who you are. Before you try to know the future, know yourself. It wasn't a decorative suggestion. It wasn't a motivational phrase carved on the wall to make a good impression. It was the fundamental instruction, the prerequisite, the absolute requirement for any wisdom the oracle could offer. Because the priests of Delphi understood something that most people still don't understand 2,500 years later, that no external answer has value if you don't know who you are. That no advice can save you if you don't know your own patterns. that no prophecy about your future is useful if you don't understand the internal forces that determine how you're going to react to whatever comes. And here you are, 2,500 years after those words were carved in stone, with access to more information than any Greek king ever dreamed of, with entire libraries in your pocket, with podcasts about philosophy, psychology, personal development, leadership, relationships, productivity, spirituality, with more self-knowledge tools available than at any other moment in human history, and you still don't know yourself. You still don't know why you react the way you react. You still don't understand why you make the decisions you make. You still can't see the patterns that repeat in your life like a cycle you can't escape. You keep looking for answers outside, in books, in mentors, in partners, in jobs, in new cities, in new experiences, when the answer you need has been carved in stone for 25 centuries. Know yourself. You haven't done the homework. The oldest, most important, most fundamental assignment that Western civilization has given to human beings, and you haven't done it. Not for lack of resources, not for lack of opportunity, for lack of will, because truly knowing yourself is uncomfortable, because what you find when you look inside isn't always pretty, because the internal mirror has no beauty filter, and what it shows you is sometimes a person you don't want to resemble. Socrates, who was deeply connected to the oracle at Delphi, who was declared by the Pythia herself to be the wisest man in Athens, precisely because he was the only one who knew that he didn't know, dedicated his entire life to this mission. He walked the streets of Athens, asking questions, not giving answers. Questions. Uncomfortable questions that forced people to confront what they really believed, what they really knew, who they really were, when you stripped away the layers of assumption and pretense. And most people hated him for it, so much that they eventually sentenced him to death. They preferred to kill him rather than keep facing the questions he asked them about themselves. And before he died, Socrates said something that's as true today as it was then. The unexamined life is not worth living. He didn't say it's less productive. He didn't say it's less successful. He didn't say it's less pleasant. He said, it's not worth living, period. Without nuance, without conditions, because a life without self-examination is a life on autopilot, a life where you repeat patterns without seeing them, make mistakes without understanding them, react without comprehending why you react that way, and reach the end of the road without ever having understood who the person was that walked it. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about self-knowledge that the Greeks understood and that modern culture has completely distorted. Self-knowledge is not an exercise in narcissism. It's not about looking in the mirror to admire yourself. It's not about writing in a journal to feel special. It's not about meditating to find your inner self, as if it were a hidden treasure that glows when you discover it. Self-knowledge is an act of strategy. It's an act of survival. It's recognizing your weaknesses so they don't destroy you. It's identifying your patterns so they stop controlling you. It's seeing your blind spots so others can't use them against you, and so you stop tripping over them. The Greek generals who visited Delphi didn't want to know themselves to feel good about themselves. They wanted to know themselves to win battles, because they knew that a general who doesn't know his own weaknesses will be destroyed by an enemy who does. And in your life, the enemy that best knows your weaknesses is you, even if you don't consciously know it. Your unconscious patterns know you better than you know yourself. They know exactly which button to push to make you react in the same predictable way as always. They know exactly what situation needs to present itself for you to fall into the same trap. They know exactly how to make you repeat the same mistake without you realizing you're repeating it. The only way to win that internal battle is to know yourself at least as well as your patterns know you. And that requires work that doesn't get done in an afternoon of reflection with a glass of wine and instrumental music in the background. It's daily work. Constant, uncomfortable, repetitive work that has no endpoint. That has no diploma telling you, congratulations, you now know yourself. It's a lifelong practice that the Stoics took directly from that inscription at Delphi and made the cornerstone of their philosophy. Epictetus taught it to his students as the first and most important of all disciplines. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every night in his meditations. Seneca performed it every time he sat down to examine his day. These weren't men trying to feel good about themselves. They were men seeking the truth about themselves, whatever the cost, however much it hurt, because they understood that the truth about oneself is the only solid foundation on which you can build a life that doesn't collapse. You've been building on sand, on the edited version, on the character, on what you think you are instead of what you really are. And then you're surprised when what you build collapses. It doesn't collapse because of bad luck. It collapses because the foundations are false, because you're building a life based on self-knowledge that isn't self-knowledge. It's well-produced self-deception. Your task for this lesson is to begin the oldest and most important practice that exists. And no, it's not a personality test or a guided meditation or writing positive affirmations in front of a mirror. It's a question, one single question you're going to ask yourself every night for the next 7 days, right before bed, when the house is quiet and there are no distractions. The question is this: what did I do today that I don't want to admit? Not what you did well, not what you're proud of, not what you accomplished. What did you do that you don't want to admit? Where were you a coward? Where were you selfish? Where did you choose comfort over what was right? Where did you lie, even a small lie, to avoid discomfort? Where did you avoid a conversation you knew was necessary? Where did the internal editor have to work overtime to turn something you did into something acceptable? Write the answer every night, without judging yourself, without punishing yourself, without turning it into a session of self-destruction, only with the intention of seeing, of starting to know yourself, of doing, for the first time in your life, the homework that was carved in stone 25 centuries ago, and that you, like the vast majority of humanity, have masterfully ignored until today. Fourth Stoic lesson: you can't change what you refuse to see, and you've spent years looking away every time the mirror shows you something uncomfortable. Life has put the mirror in front of you many times. Not once, not twice, many times. And every time it did, you looked away. It did it when your partner told you, maybe with tears in their eyes, maybe with barely contained anger, maybe with that tired voice of someone who's said the same thing too many times, exactly what was pushing them away from you. They told you that you didn't listen to them, that you were physically present but emotionally absent, that everything revolved around you, that your priorities never included them. And you heard those words, and instead of looking at the mirror being held up to you, you got defensive. That's not true. You're exaggerating. It's always my fault, right? You turned an opportunity for self-knowledge into a battlefield where the only thing that mattered was winning the argument. And you won the argument, but you lost the information. And eventually, you lost the relationship. And the next partner told you something surprisingly similar, and the next one too, and every time you looked away. It did it when your boss sat you down in that office and told you your performance wasn't where it needed to be, that you were showing up late, that your deliverables were inconsistent, that your attitude was creating conflicts on the team, and instead of listening, instead of considering the possibility that some of what they were saying might be true, You activated defense mode. This guy has it out for me. They don't recognize what I contribute. The problem is the company, not me. And when you left that job voluntarily or not, you left convinced the problem was the work environment. It never occurred to you that you were the work environment. It did it when that friend who really cared about you, sat down with you one day and told you something you didn't want to hear. They told you that you were changing, that you were becoming bitter, that you complained about everything, that you weren't the person they used to know anymore. And instead of thanking them for their honesty, instead of taking a second to consider that maybe they were right, you got angry. You accused them of not supporting you, of not understanding what you were going through, of judging you without walking in your shoes. And that friendship grew cold until it disappeared, and you lost one of the few people in your life who had the courage to tell you the truth. It did it when your body started sending you signals, the insomnia that wouldn't stop, the back that hurt for no apparent reason, the stomach that clenched every time you thought about going to work, the anxiety that appeared out of nowhere or that appeared from somewhere very specific you didn't want to acknowledge. Your body was telling you something. Your body is a mirror that doesn't lie, doesn't edit, doesn't soften, but instead of listening to it, you silenced it with pills, with alcohol, with overwork, with distractions, with anything that would let you not hear what your own body was screaming. It did it when you saw the results of your decisions repeat themselves over and over and over again. The same type of conflict at every job, the same type of breakup in every relationship, the same type of stagnation in every project. Life was showing you a pattern with the clarity of a flashing neon sign, and you turned your back on it every time, not because you were incapable of seeing it, because you didn't want to see it, because seeing meant accepting, and accepting meant changing, and changing meant work, and not the comfortable kind of work you can do on autopilot, the kind of work that forces you to take yourself apart piece by piece and rebuild from scratch. You chose blindness, and that choice has a name in Stoicism. It's called apostaxia. It's the deliberate act of not paying attention, not the involuntary ignorance of someone who doesn't know. The active decision not to see something that's right in front of you. The Stoics considered it one of the greatest diseases of the soul, not because the person didn't have access to the truth, but because they actively chose to turn their back on it. And every time they chose not to see, the pattern reinforced itself, got deeper, more automatic, more invisible, until you no longer needed to turn your head to avoid seeing it. It had integrated so completely into your way of functioning that it no longer existed as something separate you could identify. It had become you. There's a reason you look away, and you need to understand it if you want to stop doing it. You don't look away because you're weak. You don't look away because you're a coward in the simplistic sense of the word. You look away because seeing has a cost, and your mind, which is always trying to protect you from pain, calculates that cost and decides it's cheaper not to see. Seeing that you're part of the problem in your relationships means having to change the way you relate to people, and that's terribly difficult. It means rewriting patterns you've been running for decades. It means facing conversations you've been avoiding. It means being vulnerable in a way that your entire defense system considers dangerous. Seeing that your work performance has real problems means facing the possibility that you're not as competent as you think. It means accepting that there are areas where you need to grow, where you need to ask for help, where you need to admit you don't know as much as you pretend, and that directly threatens the image you've built of yourself. Seeing that your emotional patterns are hurting the people you love means carrying a guilt you'd rather not feel. It means recognizing that you've caused pain, maybe not intentionally, but real pain nonetheless, and that's something the internal editor cannot tolerate. So you look away, not out of malice, out of emotional survival. Your mind chooses blindness as anesthesia. It's easier not to feel than to feel something that could destabilize the entire belief system on which you've built your identity. But the anesthesia has a devastating side effect. While you're not feeling, life keeps moving forward. The patterns keep repeating, the relationships keep breaking, the opportunities keep getting lost, the years keep piling up. And when the anesthesia finally wears off, when one day reality hits you so hard that even the internal editor can't soften the impact, the accumulated pain is infinitely worse than the pain you were avoiding. It's like someone who has a cavity and decides not to go to the dentist because they're scared. And at first it works. The cavity is small. The pain is manageable. A painkiller here, a distraction there, and you can keep living without facing the problem. But the cavity doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It grows, deepens, reaches the nerve, and one day the pain is so intense that no painkiller works anymore. And when you finally go to the dentist, what would have been a simple filling has become an extraction, or something worse. Your unseen patterns are that cavity. Every day that passes without you seeing them, they grow, they deepen, they take deeper root, and the cost of repairing them increases exponentially over time. The good news is that it's never too late to open your eyes. The mirror is still there. It was always there. It didn't go anywhere while you were looking away. It's waiting, patient, without judgment, without pressure, just showing what is. And what it shows is not your sentence, it's your diagnosis. And a diagnosis, however painful, is the first step toward any cure. Your task for this lesson is the most confronting one yet, and I need you to approach it with the maturity of someone who has already shown courage in the 3 previous episodes. I want you to think of the last 3 times someone told you something about yourself that bothered you. Not something insulting, not something malicious, something that made you uncomfortable. Something that someone who knows you, a partner, a friend, a family member, a colleague pointed out about your behavior, and that triggered a defensive reaction in you. Something you rejected in the moment. Something you dismissed as unfair, as exaggerated, as the other person's mistaken perception. Write it down, all 3 things. And then, with the honesty we're practicing, ask yourself one question about each. What if they're right? What if what bothered me wasn't that they were wrong, but that they hit the mark? I'm not asking you to accept everything anyone says about you. There are unfair criticisms. There are distorted perceptions. There are people who project their own problems onto others. But when multiple people, at different moments in your life, point out something similar, when the same criticism appears in different words from different mouths, the probability that everyone is wrong and you're the only one who's right is extraordinarily low. The discomfort you felt when you heard that wasn't righteous indignation. It was recognition. A part of you, the part the editor can't fully control, recognized the truth in what they told you. And that part screamed. And you confused that scream with offense. But it wasn't offense. It was the sound of the mirror showing you something you didn't want to see. 5th Stoic lesson. You know your excuses better than your patterns. You know how to justify yourself, but you don't know how to explain yourself. If I asked you right now to explain why your last relationship didn't work out, you could give me an elaborate answer in less than 30 seconds. You've rehearsed it. You've told it so many times it flows on its own, like a song you know by heart. She was too controlling. He wasn't ready to commit. We were too different. The distance killed us. Work consumed all my time. Smooth answers. Articulate. Convincing. Answers you've perfected with each repetition until they became the official version of events. But if I asked you to explain what your pattern in relationships is, what you specifically do that contributes to things not working out, what your concrete role is in the dynamic that keeps repeating, you'd go silent, or you'd start going in circles without getting anywhere, or you'd go back to the official version because it's the only script you know. You know your excuses inside and out, but you don't know your patterns. You know how to justify yourself with surgical precision, but you don't know how to explain yourself. And that difference, that enormous gap between the ability to justify and the inability to explain, is the clearest proof that you don't know yourself. Because justifying and explaining are two radically different things. Justifying is looking for external reasons for what happened. It's an exercise in defense. It's saying, this happened because of these reasons that are outside of me and that I couldn't control. It's pointing outward, always outward. The market crashed. My partner didn't do their part. The boss was a tyrant. My business partners didn't deliver. The circumstances weren't right. Justifying protects you, keeps you clean, lets you walk away from every failure with your image intact, because the blame always lands somewhere else. Explaining is completely different. Explaining is looking for the internal mechanisms that produce the result. It's an exercise in understanding. It's saying, this happened, and I participated in this specific way. My behavior contributed in this concrete way. My way of reacting generated this particular consequence. Explaining points inward. Always inward, not to punish yourself, to understand yourself, to see the gears moving beneath the surface that produce the same results over and over again, regardless of external circumstances. You're a master of justification. You've developed that skill over decades. You can justify any failure in less than a minute. You can construct a convincing narrative that explains why things didn't work out and absolves you of real responsibility. You can do it so naturally you don't even realize you're doing it. It's automatic. It's reflex. It's the first response your mind produces in any situation where things didn't go as expected. But you can't explain yourself. You can't say, my pattern in relationships is that at the beginning I give everything. I overflow emotionally. I create an unsustainable intensity. And when that intensity naturally drops, because no relationship can maintain the honeymoon phase forever, I interpret normalcy as lack of love, and I start withdrawing until the relationship dies of emotional starvation. You can't say that because you've never seen it. You've never observed yourself with that clarity. Your justification system activates long before the real explanation can form. You can't say, my pattern at work is that I start with an enthusiasm that impresses everyone. I quickly earn trust. I take on more responsibilities than I can handle because I need to feel indispensable. And when I inevitably can't deliver on everything I promised, instead of admitting I overcommitted, I play the victim and blame the system for not giving me enough resources. You can't say that because the editor turns it into, the company expected too much from one person before the honest version reaches your consciousness. You can't say, my pattern with money is that I spend impulsively when I'm emotionally unstable, that I use purchases as anesthesia for the emptiness I feel, and that I then justify every expense as an investment or a necessity when it was really an act of escape. You can't say that because it's been disguised for years as life is just really expensive or everyone deserves to treat themselves. Excuses are fast, automatic, always available. They're like an army of defense attorneys living inside your head, ready to jump the moment any incriminating evidence appears. Before you can even consider the possibility that you're responsible, the lawyers have already presented their case. They've got witnesses, they've got alternative evidence. They've constructed a narrative where you're the victim or, at best, an innocent bystander to events, and they're so good they never lose a case. You've been acquitted for decades in the court of your own mind. But outside that court, in the real world, the results speak for themselves, and the results say something very different from what your internal lawyers say. The results say you've had a series of relationships that ended in suspiciously similar ways. The results say you've had conflicts in multiple work environments that look too much alike to be coincidence. The results say your finances go through the same cycles of abundance and scarcity, no matter how much you earn. The results say your friendships have a predictable expiration date. The results say there's a pattern, and that pattern has your name on it. The Stoics were deeply skeptical of justification. They saw it as a refined form of lying. Epictetus taught that the person who always has an excuse ready is the person who will never change. Because the excuse serves a precise function. It lets you stay exactly the same while giving you the illusion that the problem is somewhere else. It's the most effective magic trick there is. The problem disappears from your sight, not because it got solved, because you moved it somewhere else. You put it on the boss, on the partner, on the market, on the circumstances, and as long as it's out there, away from you, you don't need to do anything. You can stay the same, comfortable, protected, and repeating. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that applies directly here. He wrote that we should pay attention not to what others do wrong, but to what we do wrong. That the only person over whom we have real authority is ourselves, and that wasting time and energy pointing out other people's mistakes while ignoring our own is the most cowardly way to live. He didn't use the word cowardly, but the implication was clear. The man who only knows how to justify himself, who only knows how to point outward, who only knows how to explain why everything was someone else's fault, is a man who has given up the only real power he has, the power to change himself. You have that power. You've always had it, but your excuses have hidden it from you. Your justifications have convinced you that you don't need it because the problem isn't yours. And every excuse you accept is another day living exactly the same life, repeating exactly the same mistakes, arriving at exactly the same place. Your task for this lesson is going to require you to temporarily fire your internal lawyers, to send them off for the night, to tell them, "Tonight, I don't need you. Tonight I'm going to face the case without a defense." Choose a recent situation that didn't go the way you wanted, something that still bothers you, something for which you already have a well-constructed justification ready to use, and write two things. First, write the complete justification, the version where everything was the fault of external factors. Let it all out. Put it on paper with all its details and all its arguments. Give your internal lawyers their moment of glory. Second, write the explanation, the version where you include yourself as an active factor in the outcome, where you identify what you did, what you failed to do, what decisions you made, what signals you ignored, what conversations you avoided, what patterns you activated, where the question isn't who was to blame, but what was my part in this? The first version is what you've been telling yourself. The second is what you need to start listening to, because the first one protects you but keeps you trapped, and the second one makes you uncomfortable but sets you free. And between being protected and trapped, or being uncomfortable and free, the choice, if you really want to change, should be obvious. Sixth Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote every night about his own flaws, not to punish himself, but because he knew that clarity about oneself is the only real power. Imagine for a moment that you're the most powerful person in the known world, that your word is law for millions of people, that entire armies move when you command them, that senators, generals, governors, and kings of vassal nations wait for your approval to act. That every decision you make, every day, directly affects the lives of an enormous percentage of humanity. Imagine that level of power, that level of authority, that level of absolute influence over the world around you. Now imagine that this person with more power than any CEO, any president, any public figure in the modern world, sits down every night in his room, alone, with a candle and a notebook, and writes about his flaws. Not about his achievements, not about his conquests, not about the brilliant decisions he made during the day, about his flaws, about the moments where he failed, where he was impatient, where he let anger control him, where he was unjust, where his ego spoke louder than his reason, where he didn't live up to the principles he claimed to defend. That's exactly what Marcus Aurelius did, every night, for years. What we know today as the Meditations, one of the most influential philosophical texts in the history of humanity, wasn't written to be published. It wasn't written to impress anyone. It wasn't written as a literary work or as a philosophical treatise. It was written as a mirror, a private, intimate, brutally honest mirror, where the most powerful man in the world looked at himself every night without the filter of power, without the distortion of flatterers, without the protection of his office. In those pages, Marcus Aurelius doesn't present himself as a wise and composed emperor. He presents himself as a man struggling with himself. A man who recognizes his tendency toward irritability and reproaches himself for it. A man who admits that sometimes he has trouble getting out of bed in the morning and has to remind himself why he must do it. A man who confesses that he lets himself be swayed by others' opinions when he should trust his own judgment. A man who fights against vanity, against laziness, against the temptation to use his power to satisfy his ego instead of serving his people. Do you understand the magnitude of what I'm saying? The Emperor of Rome, the person before whom the entire world bowed, sat down every night to write about the ways he had failed that day. Not because anyone demanded it of him, not because an advisor recommended it, not because it was an obligation of his office, because he understood something you still haven't understood. That clarity about oneself is the only real power. Not political power, not economic power, not military power, not social power. The power to know yourself, to see yourself clearly, to know exactly where your cracks are so you can repair them before they become fractures, to know exactly where your weaknesses are so you can watch over them before they destroy you, to know exactly who you are when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, when no one is judging, when you're alone with yourself in the silence of the night. That's the power Marcus Aurelius sought every night with his notebook. Not power over others, power over himself. Because he understood, as all the Stoics understood, that power over others is an illusion. It's borrowed, it's temporary, it depends on circumstances you don't control. But power over yourself, the ability to know yourself, to govern yourself, to direct your impulses instead of being directed by them, that power is real, it's permanent, it's yours, and no one can take it from you. Now contrast that with what you do every night. What do you do when you go to bed? Do you check your phone for an hour, scrolling through news you don't need and content that gives you nothing? Do you watch videos until exhaustion overtakes you as a way of numbing yourself before sleep? Do you fall asleep with the TV on so you don't have to be alone with your thoughts, because silence feels too loud when there's nothing to drown out the inner voice? Do you toss and turn in bed ruminating about things you can't control, spending your last energy of the day on unproductive worries? Do you fall asleep without having dedicated a single second in the entire day to examining yourself honestly? When was the last time you sat in silence and honestly asked yourself how you behaved today? Not how your day went. That's a question about what happened to you. How you behaved, that's a question about what you did. Were you the person you want to be? Were your actions aligned with your stated values, with those values you proclaim when someone asks what's important to you? Did you treat people with the respect you say they deserve? Were you honest when it was easier to lie, or when the truth had a cost you didn't want to pay? Were you brave when it was more comfortable to hide, to stay quiet, to let it slide? Or did you simply survive another day on autopilot, reacting to whatever came like a pinball bouncing from side to side without any direction of its own, without any conscious intention to be better than yesterday? If you can't remember the last time you had that conversation with yourself, then you've been living too long without a mirror. You've been navigating too long without a map. You've been governed too long by impulses, by automatic reactions, by patterns you don't even know exist, because you've never taken the time to observe them. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about his flaws to punish himself. It's crucial you understand this, because many people confuse self-examination with destructive self-criticism. They're two completely different things. Destructive self-criticism is that internal monologue where you beat yourself up, where you insult yourself, where you tell yourself you're worthless, you're not enough, you do everything wrong. That's not self-knowledge, that's self-aggression. And it doesn't help with anything except sinking you deeper. What Marcus Aurelius did was different. It was observation without emotional judgment. It was looking at his actions of the day with the eyes of a scientist studying a phenomenon, without emotion, without drama, without the theater of self-punishment. Today I was impatient with that person. Why? What triggered that reaction in me? What can I do tomorrow to respond differently? It's a cold, methodical, practical analysis. It's not sitting down to cry about how bad you are. It's sitting down to understand how you function so you can function better. The difference between self-punishment and Stoic self-examination is the same difference between hitting your knee with a hammer and getting an X-ray. Both involve attention to a part of the body, but one destroys you and the other gives you information you can use to heal. Marcus Aurelius took X-rays every night of his soul. And what he found, the fractures, the inflammations, the weaknesses he didn't use to insult himself. He used it to treat himself, to improve, to be a little better tomorrow than he was today. And you can do exactly the same thing. You don't need to be an emperor. You don't need a leather notebook, or a candle, or a marble desk. You need 5 minutes. 5 minutes every night. And a genuine willingness to look at yourself without the filter of ego. Your task for this lesson is to begin your own version of the meditations, not as a literary work, as a tool for self-knowledge. Every night, for the next 7 days, before bed, take a notebook or a piece of paper and answer 3 questions. Just 3. It won't take you more than 10 minutes. First, at what moment today was I not the person I want to be? Identify a specific moment, not a generality. A concrete moment where your actions weren't aligned with the person you aspire to be. Second, why did I react that way? Not the justification, the real cause. Was it fear? Was it ego? Was it laziness? Was it insecurity? Was it an automatic pattern that activated before you could think? Third, what can I do tomorrow if the same situation presents itself? Not a grand promise of total transformation. A concrete, small, specific action that represents an improvement over what you did today. This is what the most powerful man in the world did every night of his life. Not because he had time to spare, because he understood that without that exercise, all his power was dangerous. A man with power who doesn't know himself is a man who will use that power in destructive ways without even realizing it. And a man without power, who doesn't know himself, is a man who will destroy the little he has with the same blindness. The nightly mirror isn't a luxury for philosophers. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to stop living on autopilot and start living with open eyes. 7th Stoic lesson. You get offended when someone points out what you refuse to admit to yourself, and that reaction is proof that they're right. This lesson is going to make you more uncomfortable than any other in this episode. And the reason it's going to make you uncomfortable is, precisely, the proof that you need to hear it. Think about the last time someone told you something about yourself that made you angry. Not a random insult from a stranger, not a baseless attack. Something that someone who knows you, someone close, someone who has seen how you operate in real life, pointed out about your behavior. Something that made you feel attacked. Something that triggered an immediate reaction of defense, of rage, of visceral rejection. You always do the same thing. You never listen. You're too controlling. You don't know how to apologize. You always have to be right. You shut down emotionally every time things get difficult. You say you're going to change, but you never change. Remember how you felt when you heard something like that. Remember the reaction. It was probably instantaneous. There was probably no space between hearing the words and reacting. It was like a reflex. As if someone had hit you and your body responded before your mind could process what was happening. Defense, counterattack, justification, denial. That's not true. You're exaggerating. You do things too. You don't know me as well as you think. Now, I want you to ask yourself a question that requires the most radical honesty you can muster in this moment. Why did it hurt so much? If what they told you weren't true, if it were completely false, if it had no basis in reality, it wouldn't have affected you. Think about it coldly. If someone told you you're terrible at playing chess and you've never played chess in your life, would you be offended? No. You'd laugh. It would seem absurd. You'd dismiss it without the slightest emotional effort because you know with absolute certainty that that statement has no connection to reality. But when someone tells you something that does have a connection to reality, when someone touches a truth that's alive inside you even though you've kept it hidden, the reaction is completely different. It's not laughter, it's not indifference, it's pain, it's rage. It's a disproportionate emotional activation that makes no sense if what they told you were a lie. The intensity of your defensive reaction is directly proportional to the truth contained in what you heard. Read that again. The intensity of your defensive reaction is directly proportional to the truth contained in what you heard. When something offends you deeply, when something triggers that visceral reaction that feels like a punch to the stomach, it's not because the other person is wrong. It's because they're touching something you knew but had buried under 7 layers of denial. It's because they're shining a flashlight into a corner of your inner room that you were deliberately keeping dark. It's because they're saying out loud what your own conscience has been whispering to you for years and that you've chosen not to hear. The offense isn't evidence that the other person is wrong. The offense is evidence that the other person hit the target. The Stoics understood this with a depth that modern psychology is only beginning to articulate. Epictetus taught that it's not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about things. And when someone points out a flaw that you unconsciously recognize but consciously refuse to admit, what disturbs you isn't the other person's words. What disturbs you is the judgment you make about yourself in response to those words. It's your own internal evaluation, the one the editor tries to silence, but that in that moment escapes its control, that screams, "They're right, and that means I'm worse than I want to believe." That's the real wound, not the external criticism, the internal truth that the criticism activated. Think about the times people have pointed things out to you and you weren't offended. Think about the criticisms you've received that you could listen to calmly, consider rationally, and respond to without that disproportionate emotional activation. What was the difference? The difference was that those criticisms didn't touch a truth you were hiding. They didn't illuminate any dark corner. They didn't activate any defense mechanism because there was nothing to defend. You could hear them with equanimity because they didn't threaten the narrative you had constructed about yourself. But the others, the ones that made you see red, the ones that kept you up at night, the ones that made you mentally replay the conversation for days, elaborating increasingly sophisticated counter-arguments, looking for ways to prove the other person was wrong. Those touched the truth, and your mind knows it. That's why it reacted so violently, not to protect you from the other person, to protect you from yourself, from what you would see if you dropped your defenses and simply listened. There's a psychological mechanism the Stoics intuited, and that modern psychology has documented precisely. It's called reactive projection. When someone points out something in us that we don't want to see, instead of processing the information, we violently reject it and often project it back. You do it too. Look who's talking. You should look at your own flaws before pointing out mine. That response isn't an argument, it's a shield. A shield that protects you from having to look at what they're showing you. And every time you raise that shield, you lose an opportunity to know yourself. Because the people close to you are mirrors. Not perfect mirrors, not infallible mirrors. They're imperfect mirrors that sometimes distort, that sometimes reflect their own insecurities, that sometimes see things that aren't there. But they're also mirrors that see things you cannot see, because they have a perspective that you, by definition, don't have, the external perspective. They see how you behave when you think no one is watching you with a critical eye. They see the patterns that repeat. They see the distance between what you say and what you do. They see the inconsistencies that your internal editor deletes from your self-perception. And when they point those things out to you, when they have the courage to tell you what they see, even though they know you'll probably react badly, they're giving you a gift. A gift wrapped in rough paper, yes. A gift that doesn't feel like a gift when you receive it, but a gift nonetheless, because they're giving you information you can't get any other way. Information your internal mirror can't give you because it's compromised by the editor. Information that only someone from outside, someone who sees you from an angle you can't reach, can provide. And you return that gift with a slap, with defensiveness, with counterattack, with cold silence, with emotional distance. And the person who had the courage to be honest with you learns their lesson. It's not worth telling you the truth. And they stop trying. And you end up surrounded by people who only tell you what you want to hear. And the mirror fogs up until it no longer reflects anything useful. And you keep repeating. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should thank those who point out our errors, not tolerate them, not endure them with resignation. Thank them, because those people are doing something most people don't have the courage to do, tell you the truth about yourself. And the truth about yourself, however much it hurts in the moment, is infinitely more valuable than the comfortable lie you tell yourself every day. Your task for this lesson requires you to do something your ego is going to hate. I want you to think about the most recent criticism you received from someone close to you that triggered a strong reaction. The one that made you angry, the one you dismissed as unfair, the one that made you think, this person doesn't understand me. Write it down, exactly as you remember it, without softening it, without editing it. Then write your reaction. What did you say? What did you feel? How did you respond? Did you get defensive? Did you counterattack? Did you shut down? And finally, Write the answer to this question. If this were completely true, if it didn't have a single grain of exaggeration, if it were an accurate description of something real in me, what would it mean? What would I need to change? I'm not asking you to automatically accept every criticism as absolute truth. There are unfair criticisms. There are people who project. There are observations that say more about the person making them than the person receiving them. That exists. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility that not all the criticisms you've rejected were wrong. To lower the shield for 5 minutes. To stop defending and start exploring. Because behind that shield, behind that defense you raise with such speed and such force, every time someone dares to show you something uncomfortable, there's information that can change your life, if you dare to look at it. 8th Stoic lesson. Seneca asked every night what wrong he had corrected, what vice he had fought, in what way he was better than yesterday, and you haven't had that conversation with yourself in years. If Marcus Aurelius used his nightly notebook as a mirror to see himself, Seneca used his as a courtroom where he was simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the judge. But not a courtroom designed to condemn, a courtroom designed to correct. Seneca described this practice in detail in his work on anger. Every night, when his wife fell asleep and the house went quiet, Seneca reviewed his entire day, from morning to that moment. Every conversation, every decision, every reaction, and he asked himself 3 questions that are, possibly, the 3 most powerful questions a human being can ask themselves at the end of the day. First, what wrong have I corrected today? Second, what vice have I fought? Third, in what way am I better than yesterday? Read them again, slowly, because each of those questions contains a depth that isn't obvious at first glance. What wrong have I corrected today? This question assumes something fundamental, that there are wrongs to correct, that you're not perfect, that every day arrives with errors, with slips, with moments where you didn't measure up, and that your job, your real job, as a conscious human being, isn't to pretend those errors don't exist. It's to identify them and correct them, not tomorrow, today. This question transforms error from a source of shame into an opportunity for action. It doesn't ask you, what did you do wrong, so you can punish yourself. It asks you, what did you correct, so you can evaluate yourself, not by your falls, but by your ability to get up and adjust course. What vice have I fought? This question is even deeper, because it doesn't talk about isolated errors. It talks about tendencies, about patterns, about those recurring inclinations you know you have, that you know damage you, but that keep appearing day after day because they're rooted in the deepest part of your character. Impatience, arrogance, laziness, cowardice disguised as caution, envy disguised as ambition, selfishness disguised as self-care. Seneca doesn't ask if you eliminated the vice. That would be naive. Deep vices aren't eliminated in a day. He asks if you fought it, if you at least stood up to it, if you were at least aware of its presence and decided not to let it win without a fight. Because fighting a vice, even if you lose the day's battle, makes you stronger for tomorrow's battle. And not fighting it, letting it win by default, because you didn't even notice, it makes you weaker. In what way am I better than yesterday? This is the question that closes the circle. Because it's not enough to see the errors. It's not enough to fight the vices. You need to measure progress. You need to be able to point to something concrete, something tangible, something real that's different today compared to yesterday. Not a vague feeling of, I think I improved. Something specific. Today I listened without interrupting in a conversation where I normally would have interrupted. Today I stayed quiet when I felt the impulse to say something hurtful. Today I asked for help when I normally would have pretended I could handle it alone. Today, I admitted I was wrong when I normally would have insisted on being right. Something that concrete. Something you can write in a single sentence that represents a real step, however small, in the right direction. Seneca did this every night. A man who was one of the wealthiest in Rome, a man who had more social, political, and financial obligations than you or I can imagine. A man whose daily life was full of commitments, high-impact decisions, political intrigues that could cost him his life. And yet, he found time every night to sit in silence and have that conversation with himself, because he understood that without that conversation, the day wasn't over. It was like a captain going to sleep without checking the ship's course. Maybe the ship keeps moving forward, but toward where? Without the nightly review, you have no idea if you're advancing toward where you want to go, or if you're drifting 1 degree off course each day. 1 degree, that seems insignificant, but after a year leaves you miles away from your destination. Now think about your own life. When was the last time you had an honest conversation with yourself? Not an internal complaint about how unfair life is. Not a self-pity session where you tell yourself how hard you have it. Not a fantasy about what you're going to do when things change. A real conversation, structured, honest, where you ask yourself what you did well, what you did wrong, and what you're going to do differently tomorrow. If you can't remember when that was, then you've gone too long without captaining your own ship. You've been letting the current carry you. You've been reacting instead of directing. You've been surviving each day instead of building something with intention. And the result is predictable. You arrive at places you didn't choose, with people you didn't consciously select, living a life you didn't design. And then you complain that you don't like where you are. Seneca said that after this nightly examination, his sleep was deeper and more peaceful. And this wasn't a metaphor. When you've reviewed your day with honesty, when you've faced your errors instead of hiding them, when you've looked your vices in the face instead of pretending they don't exist, there's a release of psychological tension that's almost physical. The weight of the unexamined, of what you know you did wrong but don't want to admit, of the patterns you see out of the corner of your eye but refuse to confront. That weight accumulates during the day and stays with you at night. It's why you can't sleep. It's why you toss and turn in bed. It's why your mind won't shut off. It's not generic insomnia. It's the mind trying to process what you refuse to process consciously. And when you give it that space, when you sit down and do the review work Seneca did every night, the mind rests, because it no longer needs to process in the background what you've processed in the foreground. But there's something I need to clarify about this practice so you don't confuse it with something it's not. Seneca's nightly examination isn't a torture session. It's not sitting down to beat yourself up over everything you did wrong. It's not an exercise in self-destruction where you end up feeling worse than when you started. It's an exercise in lucidity, in clarity, in seeing what is so you can work with it. Seneca himself said he appeared before his own tribunal with firmness but without cruelty. That he said things to himself like, "Today you were too aggressive in that argument. Don't do it again. You gained nothing from it, and you lost the respect of someone who matters to you." It's direct. It's firm. But it's not destructive. It's the voice of a demanding teacher who wants the best for his student, not the voice of an executioner who wants to punish him. That's the difference you need to internalize. Self-examination isn't self-punishment. Self-examination is applied self-knowledge. It's looking at yourself to improve, not to destroy yourself. It's finding the error to correct it. not to use that error as proof that you don't deserve anything good. The goal isn't to feel guilty, the goal is to feel aware. And awareness, unlike guilt, has transformative power. Guilt paralyzes you, awareness moves you. Your task for this lesson is to adopt Seneca's nightly examination for the next 7 days. Every night, after the noise of the day quiets down, sit with a piece of paper and answer Seneca's 3 questions adapted to your reality. First, what wrong did I correct today? If you didn't correct any, write that too. Write, today I corrected nothing. I saw the errors and let them pass. That honesty is also valuable because it shows you where you really are. Second, what vice did I fight today? Identify the negative tendency you faced. Impatience, pride, avoidance, lying, excessive control. Did you stand up to it or let it win without a fight? Either answer is useful if it's honest. Third, in what way am I better today than yesterday? Find one thing, just one. It can be tiny, it can be invisible to the rest of the world, but it has to be real. Because that thing, that almost imperceptible improvement, is proof that change is possible. And if it's possible once, it's possible twice. And if it's possible twice, it's possible always. Seneca did this for decades, not because he was a saint, because he didn't want to be one. He wanted to be a man who knew himself, a man who could look at himself without turning away. A man who at the end of his life could say, I wasn't perfect, but I was aware, and that made all the difference. That's the goal, not perfection, awareness. And awareness begins every night with 3 questions, a piece of paper, and the willingness to hear the answer even if you don't like what you hear. 9th Stoic lesson. Self-knowledge isn't a destination you arrive at, but a daily practice of brutal honesty that most people abandon because it hurts. There's a fantasy many people have about self-knowledge. The fantasy goes something like this. One day, if I do enough introspection, if I read the right books, if I meditate enough, if I have the right transformative experience, I'm going to reach a point where I finally know myself completely, where I have all the answers about myself, where I understand all my patterns, all my fears, all my motivations. And when I reach that point, everything will be different. I'll be at peace. I'll always make the right decisions. I'll stop repeating the same mistakes. I'll be that enlightened version of myself who has everything under control. It's a beautiful fantasy, comforting, motivating, and it's completely false. Self-knowledge isn't a destination. It's not a place you arrive at. It's not a summit you reach from which you can look down with satisfaction saying, I made it, now I know myself. It's not a title you get after completing a course. It's not a permanent state of clarity that once achieved can never be lost. None of that. Self-knowledge is a practice, a daily practice, constant, repetitive, endless. One that has no graduation, no certificate, no finish line, and one that most people abandon because it hurts. It hurts because every day shows you something new about yourself you didn't know, or something you knew but had managed to forget, or something you thought you'd overcome but turns out you'd just hidden better. It hurts because there's no moment where you can say, done, I've examined myself, I don't need to keep looking anymore. There's always more. There's always a deeper layer. There's always a pattern you hadn't seen, a motivation you hadn't examined, a fear you hadn't acknowledged, a contradiction you hadn't faced. And that's exhausting, tiring, frustrating, because we want the quick fix. We want the immediate result. We want to read a book, do a workshop, have a revelation in the shower, and come out the other side transformed forever. But that's not how it works. Self-knowledge works more like hygiene. You don't shower once and stay clean forever. You shower every day because life is dirty. Because every day you accumulate new layers of dust, sweat, residue that need to be cleaned off. And if you stop showering because I already showered last week, the results are predictable and unpleasant. Your mind works the same way. Every day you accumulate new reactions you didn't examine, new justifications the internal editor produced without your supervision, new moments where autopilot took control and you acted without awareness, new micro-decisions that moved you closer to or further from who you want to be without you realizing it. And if you don't review that, if you don't clean that, if you don't examine that regularly, it accumulates, it stratifies, it hardens. And one day, you have so many layers of emotional and mental grime on top of you that you can no longer see the person underneath. Most people abandon this practice for a specific reason you need to understand, so you don't fall into the same trap. The reason isn't that it's hard, although it is. The reason isn't that it hurts, although it does. The reason is that the results aren't immediate or spectacular. There's no cinematic moment of enlightenment where everything clicks and your life changes forever. What there is a slow, gradual, sometimes imperceptible process where little by little you start noticing things you didn't notice before. Where little by little your reactions start having a microsecond more space between stimulus and response. Where little by little you start making slightly more conscious decisions, slightly more aligned with who you want to be. It's like watching a plant grow. If you look at it every day, you see nothing. If you look at it after a month, the change is obvious. But we live in a culture of instant results, of before and after transformations, of stories of radical change in 30 days or an intensive weekend, of gurus who promise that a single seminar will change your life forever. And when the practice of self-knowledge doesn't produce that kind of instant, photogenic result, when, after a week of nightly examination, you don't feel radically transformed, when after a month you haven't had that cinematic revelation you expected, the temptation to quit is enormous. This doesn't work. I already tried it and didn't see results. It's not for me. There are more efficient ways to improve, and you go back to autopilot. Back to the narcotic comfort of not looking at yourself, back to the anesthesia of entertainment, of constant distraction, of the unexamined life that feels so comfortable and is so devastatingly empty. And the patterns come back, because they never left. They were just waiting for you to stop observing them to take back control. And the mistakes repeat, and the relationships break in the same way, and the projects fail at the same point. And 5 years later, you're in exactly the same place, wondering why nothing changes, without realizing that nothing changes because you stopped doing the only thing that can produce real change, looking at yourself. The Stoics understood this perfectly. That's why they didn't talk about self-knowledge as an event, but as a discipline. The same word they used for philosophical practice, askesis, is the root of the word asceticism and the word exercise. For them, knowing yourself required the same commitment as training the body. You don't go to the gym once and expect to be fit forever. You go every day, and every day is hard, and every day hurts a little, and every day the temptation to stay in bed is real. But you go, because you know that results come from accumulation, not from a single event. Epictetus told his students that philosophy isn't something you study, it's something you live. Every day, in every decision, in every interaction. In every moment where you choose between reacting automatically and responding consciously, and that choice, that seemingly insignificant choice you make hundreds of times a day, is the practice of self-knowledge in action. It's not reading a book about yourself. It's observing yourself in real time. It's noticing you're about to lose your patience and asking yourself why. It's noticing you're avoiding a conversation and asking yourself what fear is behind that avoidance. It's noticing you're about to make an impulsive decision and stopping for a second to ask yourself whether that decision comes from reason or from pattern. That's what it means that self-knowledge is a daily practice. It's not sitting down once a week to reflect on your life. It's living each moment with a greater degree of attention to yourself. It's turning your entire life into an observation laboratory where the subject of study is you, your reactions, your emotions, your impulses, your justifications, your fears, your decisions. All of it. Observed, examined, understood, not to judge, to know. And the hardest truth to accept about this practice is that it never ends. You'll be 80 years old and still discovering things about yourself you didn't know, still finding patterns you hadn't seen, still being surprised by the creative ways your mind deceives itself. And that's not a failure. That's human nature. We're infinitely complex creatures, layers upon layers upon layers. And the person who believes they already know themselves completely is the person who stopped looking. And the person who stopped looking is the person who's going to be blindsided by their own patterns at the worst possible moment. Your task for this lesson is to establish a commitment, not an abstract commitment, not a vague intention of, I'm going to know myself better, a concrete commitment to a daily practice you're going to maintain beyond the 7 days we've been using as a framework in the previous lessons. The commitment is this: every day, at least once, you're going to stop and ask yourself one question about your own behavior. Just one. Why did I react that way? What am I avoiding? What emotion is underneath what I'm feeling on the surface? Am I acting from reason or from pattern? One question, one pause, one moment of conscious observation about yourself. It doesn't need to be an elaborate ritual. It doesn't need to last more than 30 seconds. It just needs to be honest, and it just needs to happen every day, without exception. Without I don't have time today. Without I'll do it tomorrow. Every day. Like showering, like eating, like breathing. Because knowing yourself isn't a project you finish. It's a way of living. And the decision to live that way, or to live on autopilot, is the most important decision you can make, because absolutely everything else depends on it. 10th Stoic lesson. Today you can start looking at yourself for real, not to destroy yourself with criticism, but to build yourself with awareness. We've traveled an intense road in this episode, a road that started with a bronze mirror that showed you a blurry, comfortable version of yourself, and that brought you here, in front of a glass mirror that doesn't forgive, doesn't soften, shows everything as it is. And if you've made it to this point, if you didn't turn off the audio, if you didn't look for a distraction, if you stayed here listening to truths you didn't want to hear, it's because there's a part of you that's already ready to change. But before taking the final step of this episode, I need to clarify something that's absolutely crucial. Something that could be the difference between this work transforming you or destroying you. Because there's a real danger in everything we've done today, and that danger is confusing self-knowledge with self-destruction. They're two things that look similar on the surface but lead to opposite destinations. Self-destruction says, I'm terrible, I'm a failure, everything I do is wrong, I don't deserve anything good. Look at all my flaws, look at all my mistakes, look at all my destructive patterns, I'm a lost cause. Self-destruction uses the information from the mirror as ammunition against yourself. It takes every flaw you discover and turns it into a sentence. It takes every pattern you identify and uses it as proof that you're irreparably broken. Self-destruction sinks you, paralyzes you. strips away your will to try anything, because what's the point if I'm always going to be this way? Conscious self-knowledge says something completely different. It says, this is what's here. These are my patterns. These are my flaws. These are the ways I've been sabotaging myself. Now that I see it, I can do something about it. Conscious self-knowledge uses the information from the mirror as a blueprint for construction, not as an indictment. It takes each flaw and asks, how can I work with this? It takes each pattern and asks, how can I interrupt this cycle? It takes each error and asks, what does this teach me about what I need to do differently? The difference is intention. Self-destruction looks in order to condemn. Self-knowledge looks in order to build. Both use the same mirror. Both see the same things. But what they do with what they see is radically different. And the direction you choose, condemn or build, will determine whether this episode was the beginning of something new or simply an elegant torture session that leaves you worse off than when you started. I need you to choose to build. The Stoics didn't examine themselves to hate themselves. They examined themselves to improve themselves. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about his flaws because he enjoyed the misery of seeing himself as imperfect. He wrote because every identified flaw was a flaw he could work on. Seneca didn't ask himself brutal questions every night because he was an intellectual masochist. He asked them because every honest answer gave him information he could use to be a better man the next day. Epictetus didn't teach his students to look at themselves without filters so they would get depressed. He taught them because he knew that only from truth can you build something that lasts. The truth about you isn't your enemy. It's your raw material. It's the clay from which you're going to mold the person you want to be. And yes, the clay sometimes smells bad. Sometimes it has stones in it. Sometimes it has cracks you didn't know were there. But it's real. It's tangible. It's yours. And with real clay, you can build something solid. With the illusion of perfect clay, you can't build anything at all. So what do you do now with everything you've seen today? You've seen that you don't know yourself as well as you thought. You've seen that your internal editor has been producing an edited version of you for years that lets you live comfortably but keeps you blind to your real patterns. You've seen that you repeat the same mistakes because the problem travels with you, not with the circumstances. You've seen that the oldest instruction in Western civilization, know thyself, is exactly the task you've been ignoring your whole life. You've seen that you look away every time the truth presents itself. You've seen that you know your excuses better than your patterns. You've seen how Marcus Aurelius and Seneca practiced self-examination as the most important discipline of their lives. You've seen that you get offended when people tell you the truth precisely because it's the truth. And you've seen that self-knowledge isn't a destination, but a daily practice that requires the same commitment as any other discipline worth pursuing. With all that in hand, you have two options. The first option is to do nothing. Close this episode, say, "That was interesting," and keep living exactly as you have been, with the editor running at full speed, with the patterns repeating in invisible mode, with the excuses ready for every failure, with the mirror fogged up so you don't see what makes you uncomfortable. It's the easy option. It's the comfortable option. And it's the option that guarantees that 5 years from now, you'll be exactly where you are now, asking the same questions, making the same mistakes, blaming the same circumstances. The second option is to start today, not tomorrow, not Monday, not when conditions are perfect, because conditions will never be perfect, and that's just another excuse from the internal editor to postpone the uncomfortable. Today, start the practice. Start looking at yourself with the genuine intention of seeing what's there, not what you want to be there. Start asking yourself the uncomfortable questions you've been dodging your whole life. Start lowering your defenses when someone points out something that hurts, considering the possibility that the pain comes from the truth contained in those words and not from the injustice of the person saying them. Start writing every night about who you were today, not who you think you were, not who you wish you'd been, but who you actually were and about who you want to be tomorrow. It's the difficult option. It's the option that requires courage every day. It's the uncomfortable option your ego is going to resist with all its strength. And it's the only option that has a real chance of taking you somewhere different from the place you've been stuck for years. Because the truth, the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago, and that you need to embrace today as if your life depended on it, because in a sense it does, is that you cannot change what you don't know. You cannot repair what you don't see. You cannot stop repeating a pattern you haven't identified. You cannot stop falling into the same trap if you don't even know the trap exists. And you cannot build a new life on foundations you've never examined, because those foundations might be rotten, might have invisible cracks, might be about to collapse, and you wouldn't know it, because you never bent down to look. Everything starts with looking at yourself. Everything. Absolutely everything. Every real change. Every transformation that goes beyond the cosmetic. Every improvement that isn't superficial, but structural, that isn't temporary, but permanent. Everything starts in the mirror, and the mirror starts with the decision not to look away. Your final task for this episode is an act of commitment you're going to make today, now, before inertia convinces you that you can do it later. I want you to get a notebook, not your phone, not an app, a physical notebook you can keep on your nightstand. And on the first page, I want you to write 5 things, 5 truths about yourself you've been avoiding. Not superficial flaws like, I'm sometimes late. Deep truths, real patterns. Behaviors you know are costing you dearly, but that you've never put into words, because putting them into words makes them real. And what's real can't be ignored so easily. Things like, I sabotage my relationships by shutting down emotionally when things get serious because I'm afraid of getting hurt. Or, I start projects with explosive enthusiasm and abandon them when the discipline phase begins because I can't tolerate effort without immediate results. Or, I blame others for problems I create myself because accepting my responsibility would force me to change, and change terrifies me. 5 truths. In your handwriting, in a real notebook, written with the honesty of someone who finally decides to look at themselves without filters. That notebook is going to be your portable mirror, your personal version of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, your nightly tribunal in the style of Seneca, your daily practice of self-knowledge that will grow with every page you fill. It's not going to be comfortable, it's not going to be pleasant, but it's going to be real. And what's real, however uncomfortable, is the only thing you can build something on that won't collapse. We've reached the end of episode 4, and what you just did in these lessons is something most people never do in their entire lives. Look at yourself. Not look at yourself superficially. Not look at yourself with the bronze mirror that softens and distorts and gives you back a kind version of reality. Look at yourself for real, with the glass mirror, with the brutal honesty the Stoics practiced every night, and that Western civilization carved in stone 25 centuries ago as the most important instruction a human being can receive. And what you saw wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Let's walk through what we experienced together, because I want the magnitude of this work to be engraved in you before routine tries to erase it. In the introduction, you understood that the weight you let go of in episode 3 wasn't just sinking you, it was also hiding you. It served as a distraction. It kept you so busy carrying that you never had time to look at yourself. And when you let go, when your hands emptied, what was exposed was something the weight had been covering. You, without disguises, without excuses, without anything left to hide behind. In the first Stoic lesson, you discovered the internal editor. That tireless narrator that's been producing an edited version of you for years. A version where you always come out clean, where failures are always someone else's fault, where every mistake has a justification that exempts you from responsibility. You saw how that editor keeps you blind to your own patterns, and how, as long as it keeps operating without supervision, you'll never be able to truly change. In the second Stoic lesson, you faced the most uncomfortable truth of all, that you are the constant in all your failures, that the problem travels with you, that changing jobs, cities, partners, plans changes nothing if you don't change the one traveling inside all those situations. As Musonius Rufus said, changing location without changing yourself is simply redecorating the prison. In the third Stoic lesson, we traveled to the oracle at Delphi and found the oldest and most ignored instruction of civilization: know thyself. You understood that generations of kings and philosophers considered self-knowledge the absolute prerequisite for any wisdom, and that Socrates lived and died defending the idea that an unexamined life is not worth living. In the fourth Stoic lesson, you saw clearly all the times life put the mirror in front of you and you looked away. Your partner who told you exactly what the problem was. Your boss who pointed out what you needed to correct. Your friend who had the courage to be honest with you. Your body that sent you signals you silenced. Each of those was an opportunity for self-knowledge that you rejected because seeing meant changing, and changing was harder than looking away. In the fifth Stoic lesson, you unmasked your internal lawyers. That legion of justifications, always ready, always articulate, always convincing, that turn every failure into a story where you're the innocent victim of unjust circumstances. You saw the difference between justifying and explaining. And you understood that as long as you keep justifying, you'll never be able to explain yourself. And as long as you can't explain yourself, you'll never be able to change yourself. In the sixth Stoic lesson, you learned about Marcus Aurelius's most intimate practice, sitting down every night to write about his own flaws, not to punish himself, to have clarity about himself, because he understood that this clarity was the only real power. More real than political power, more real than military power. The power to know yourself so you can govern yourself. In the seventh Stoic lesson, you discovered that the intensity of your defensive reaction to criticism is directly proportional to the truth that criticism contains. That you get offended not because the other person is wrong, but because they're illuminating something you've been deliberately keeping in the dark. And that every time you raise the shield of defense, you lose an invaluable opportunity to know yourself through the eyes of someone who sees you from an angle you can't reach. In the eighth Stoic lesson, you adopted Seneca's nightly examination. The 3 questions that man asked himself every night without fail. What wrong did I correct? What vice did I fight? In what way am I better than yesterday? And you understood that these 3 questions, practiced consistently, have more transformative power than any self-help book, any seminar, any momentary revelation. In the 9th Stoic lesson, you accepted that self-knowledge isn't a destination you arrive at, but a daily practice that never ends. That there won't be a moment of illumination where everything clicks. That change is gradual, slow, sometimes imperceptible, and that most people quit precisely because of that. But that you're not going to quit. because now you understand that the alternative, living on autopilot, is infinitely worse. And in the 10th Stoic lesson, you made the most important distinction of the entire episode: the difference between looking at yourself to destroy yourself and looking at yourself to build yourself. You understood that self-knowledge isn't an exercise in torture, it's an act of architecture. You're gathering the real blueprints of the structure you are, with all its cracks and all its points of strength, so you can decide what to reinforce, what to repair, and what to build new. If this episode confronted you, if something you heard today has been turning over in your chest, if you feel that for the first time in a long time you truly saw yourself, leave in the comments the phrase we established at the beginning. Today, I look at myself without filters to stop repeating what destroys me. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who keeps repeating the same mistakes and keeps blaming circumstances. Someone who hasn't really looked at themselves in years. Someone who needs to have the mirror held up to them with the same honesty with which we held it up to you today. And do the homework. Open that notebook. Write those 5 truths. Begin the nightly examination, not as a one-week project, as a life practice. Now, I need to prepare you for what's coming, because what's coming is, probably, the hardest episode of this entire series. In these 4 episodes, you've traveled a path that few people travel. You accepted that you were lost. You confronted the lies you were telling yourself. You let go of the weight you were carrying. And today you looked at yourself for real, without filters, without editing, without the protection of the character you'd built to live comfortably. And now that you see yourself clearly, now that you know who you really are, with your patterns and your flaws and your defense mechanisms and your favorite excuses, a question arises that you can't avoid. What do you do with that person you see in the mirror? Because that person, that version of you, with all its destructive patterns, with all its automatic reactions, with all its repetitive cycles, that person can't take you where you need to go. It can't. It has too many ingrained habits, too many programmed responses, too many neural pathways that always lead to the same destination. That person was designed, built, shaped over years to produce exactly the results you're getting. And asking that person to produce different results without fundamentally changing is like asking a computer program to do something it wasn't programmed to do. It can't, no matter how many times it tries. It's limited by its own code. What you need isn't to improve that person. What you need is something much more radical, much more terrifying, much more transformative. What you need is for that person to disappear, and for a new one to be born. Episode 5 is called "The Person You Were Has to Disappear So Who You Must Be Can Be Born," and it's going to ask you for something no one has ever asked of you. To kill the version of you that no longer serves you. Not improve it, not adjust it, not patch it up. Kill it, let it go. Allow it to die, so that from that empty space, from those ashes, something completely new can be born. It's the hardest step on this entire journey, and it's the step without which everything before it is just preparation without results. Because there's no point in accepting that you're lost if you're not willing to let the one who got lost die. There's no point in confronting your lies if you're not willing to let the liar die. There's no point in letting go of the weight if you're not willing to let the one who clung to it for years die. There's no point in looking at yourself in the mirror if you're not willing to let the person you see die so that the person you need to be can be born. Episode 5 is going to be a death, and like all deaths, it's going to hurt. But on the other side of that death is a birth, and that birth is the real beginning of everything you've been searching for. This is Stoicism for Winners. This is From Lost to Unstoppable. And today you looked at yourself with an honesty most people never find. See you in episode 5. Bring everything you've learned in these 4 episodes. You're going to need it, because what's coming isn't a lesson, it's a transformation. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.